This episode of the Cult Popture podcast was brought to you by our Patreon. If you want to tell us which films we should watch or get 2 extra exclusive podcasts a month, then please consider joining the cult and donating at www.patreon.com/cultpopture. Welcome everybody to the Cult Popture podcast. Today we have something extraordinarily special to share with you.
The specialist thing we've ever done.
Yeah, we feel very good about this. So we managed, if you haven't read the title of the episode or don't know what it means, we managed to score an interview that you're about to hear with an MVP of the podcast.
MVP of FFF.
Yeah, someone who has been involved in a lot of stuff we've either covered in Film Franchise Fortnights or a lot of stuff that has affected our personal interests in film. So today we are interviewing writer-director Chris Weitz, and you may recognise that name from...
Where do I know that name, AJ?
Where do you know that name? So this guy has had an extraordinarily varied career. In terms of the podcast, he has directed with his brother Paul Weitz the film... Paul Weitz... Did I not say that?
You said Paul Weitz.
Paul Weitz.
Sorry, Chris.
Sorry, Chris. He directed with Paul American Pie, which is one of our essentials, I think. One of our essential must-listen-to episodes of the podcast.
But, you know, I'm a big fan of American Pie, AJ, but I'd like to go back even further, and one of my favourite episodes of the podcast is the Twilight Saga. Did he have anything to do with that?
Well, I'm glad you asked, because he actually solo-directed Twilight Saga New Moon, the second film in the franchise.
You have got to be kidding me.
I know.
Okay, AJ. This guy seems pretty cool, but I'm not just a big fan of Film Franchise Fortnights. I like to listen to the Off-Week podcasts as well, and one of my favourite is talking about the state of Star Wars. Now, there's no way that the guy behind American Pie could have somehow been involved in Star Wars, right?
Well, he's actually one of the 4 credited writers for Star Wars Rogue One.
What?
I know. And if you thought it was shocking that the same guy who wrote, was one of the writers for Rogue One, directed American Pie and New Moon, well, he also wrote Nutty Professor II with his brother, a few of his other projects.
AJ, so I've got to stop you there.
Yep.
This is too much for me to handle.
Yeah.
But I also love those little cult popcorn videos you did a wee while ago, and there was one that really spoke to me.
Yeah,
it was about the film About a Boy.
And he also wrote and directed About a Boy with Paul Weitz, and who else was writing it with them?
Well,
Peter Hedges as well. So this guy has had an extremely varied career. He's done a lot of stuff, and we couldn't believe that the same guy was the name behind all of these projects. A few other things I'll rattle off. He wrote ANTZ with Paul Weitz and Todd Alcott. He also wrote The Golden Compass, Cinderella, the 2015 remake. He wrote The Mountain Between Us with J. Mills Goodlow, is that what that says? And he also directed with Paul the film Down to Earth, and he solo directed The Golden Compass, A Better Life, and Operation Finale, all very different projects.
Yeah, Operation Finale available on Netflix now.
That's true. So we just wanted to know, what the hell, man? How are you the same voice behind all these extremely different projects?
Yeah, and speaking of voices, let's get ours out of here. And then we'll have them in a second talking to Chris. But this pre-recorded segment is over. Here's the interview.
All right, so we are here with Chris Weitz. How are you, Chris?
I'm great, thank you. I'm surprisingly not hungover, given that I had 4 martinis last night.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Cool. I'm in a similar situation. I'm a couple nights on, actually. I drank too much whiskey and had to sleep the day away to make sure I didn't get sick or anything. So.
Oh, yeah. Well, you guys look younger in spite of your profuse beard growth, but it only gets worse, I'm warning you.
Okay, well, thank you. This is the first nugget of beautiful advice and information we've got.
That's very positive.
Yeah. Cool. So, Chris, I think one of the first things I wanted to ask you, and I think when someone finds out about the fact that you're the guy behind all these different things, I think the first thing that people think when they know about your career is like all your projects, not all your projects, but a lot of your projects are like crazily different from each other. Because like it's common for writers or directors to stick to like a theme or a target audience or a genre, but your work is a lot more diverse. So what's the biggest difference between working on something like Rogue One, a Star Wars story, and working on Nutty Professor II?
The degree of success of the movie, for one thing. How happy I am to be doing it.
Interesting.
I mean, when we were working on Nutty Professor II, I think we sort of got it. This is my brother and I'm talking about. We sort of did it to get out of a contract. But yeah, I mean, there's. In a way, it's all the same, right? You try to make it about people, even if they're robots, and even if they are nutty professors. But I think you might be able to characterize my career as doing the first movie that I was able to direct, American Pie, and then desperately trying to avoid the implications of having directed a teen sex comedy, so that you end up... You end up directing a movie about a Nazi being hunted down by the Israeli Mossad, and you wonder how it was that you got there. I think, it's probably much smarter to build a brand by doing things in a similar wheelhouse all the time. And I think that a lot of the really famous directors you think of and screenwriters have done that. But to me, it's always been that it's really hard to make movies, even bad movies. You try to make a good movie every time. And after 1 or 2 years of working on something, I sort of never want to see anything like it again. So I just sort of want to move on to something different. Also, I mean, I'm 49 years old now. It would be really revolting for me to be making movies about teens losing their virginity. Not to mention that now when I look back on American Pie, I mean, when I think about the sequence in which all the kids are watching the exchange student get undressed over the web, I mean, at the time it seemed pretty fanciful and kind of funny, and now it actually just seems creepy. So I don't think we'd be able to make those movies anymore.
Well, because that's we did a whole episode on the entire 8-film American Pie saga, and that was a big through line. That was a big through line through that episode, was because we did it right after doing the Hangover trilogy and right before doing Revenge of the Nerds. So on the scale of how creepy things are nowadays, I would say American Pie's a little bit more forgiven compared to something like Revenge of the Nerds, which has
Revenge of the Nerds is criminal. Yeah, it is sexual assault, isn't it? So I think we're heading probably in the right direction. I mean, away from dressing up as Darth Vader in order to have sex with your enemy's girlfriend.
We are moving away from that. Thank God.
Yeah, as a society, thankfully.
Yeah. So back to like the varied nature of your work. If there are any common traits of a Chris Weitz film, what are those common traits?
Well, let me see. I think that the importance of secondary characters, right? So in some ways, the movies that my brother and I started making, the movies that we keep making individually, are inspired by old Hollywood films. And if you look at old 1930s and 40s Hollywood comedies, all of the character actors and secondary characters have things to say. So it's not always just about the hero. We like sort of riffing on secondary characters. And in that regard, too, I think what we're mainly concerned with is people talking to one another. No matter how many other bells and whistles there are, it's really about the emotional relations between people, and that may not be a very funny thing to say, but it is true.
I totally see it. Like, now that you've said it, I'm looking at your filmography, and like you've got obvious things like American Pie and Nutty Professor are full to the brim of like wacky and interesting secondary characters. But even something like Rogue One is a movie of secondary characters. That's an ensemble cast, so that actually makes sense. Yeah.
I think. I think one of the characters I love most that I've worked on is Donnie Yen's character in in Rogue One,
Totally.
because he doesn't, he like all of those characters, he dies pretty quickly. You don't get to see very much of him, but he has some things to say that are relevant. I mean, I think too many movies are about the hero's story alone, and until recently, it's always been some white dude. So it is fun to write stuff for other kinds of people.
Cool. So that's awesome.
Yeah, so you touched on there about working with your brother, and so you've done a lot of work collaboratively, like working with your brother and the writing on Rogue One and things like that. So how does that sort of work? Do you have a preference working alone or working in a group, and how are they different from each other?
Well, I'd much rather work in a group, especially if they're doing most of the work. But I find that, one of the great things about comedy is that it's often written in groups, and that's kind of natural because humor doesn't exist in a vacuum. And I find that a really lovely experience. Unfortunately, nowadays, most of my work is alone, and I find it very lonely, to the point of going slightly insane. So I think that the difference is that writing in a group, especially writing a comedy, is kind of a social experience, and writing alone is kind of a psychological experience. Usually these days involving me trying to keep myself from procrastinating, which I'm very, very good at. So I miss the days when it was my brother and me working together all day. And sometimes we'll just get together and kind of sit in the same room working, just to get a bit of a taste of what it was like to not be alone.
Cool. So one of the things, I think, because one of the reasons we wanted to interview you is because our podcast mainly focuses on comprehensive rundowns of every film franchise known to man, and your name has come up a lot in the franchises that we've covered, and probably, as we said before, as we were talking about before, probably the most influential one of those for us anyway was the American Pie series. Now, You only directed, or you and Paul directed the first film, but you are credited as executive producer on the theatrical sequels. Yes. And this is a question I think a lot of people who are peripheral to film want to ask, and that is, what does an executive producer do?
The answer is not much in my case. We were executive producers on American Pie 2 when we were shooting About a Boy. So we didn't have much time to address that. So executive producer is an incredibly flexible term. That's what, and it's a bit hard to explain to people who are not in the film industry. It could mean that you are doing an incredible amount of work, but you don't have enough clout to insist that you're producer. And so you settle grudgingly for executive producer. Or it could be that you're doing practically nothing, and out of the kindness of their hearts, the studio it throws you that bone, which is us on American Pie 2. And the reason I think that happened was that American Pie had been such a surprise hit for the studio that everyone was just kind of drunk on money. And they were very generous in giving us that credit afterwards. I think, I would like to think that we had some helpful things to say along the process, but our contribution after the first movie, frankly, was pretty small. For instance, I have not seen all of the 8 films you were talking about. I assume you're also talking about straight to video.
American Pie Presents.
The American Pie Presents series.
Right.
Yeah, so you haven't seen them.
I haven't. I think, does one of them involve running around naked? And
the Naked Mile.
Yeah, that's the Naked Mile. Okay, well, that makes sense. I think that was Eugene Levy involved in all those? And
most in all of them.
I'm so glad. He's such a lovely guy. I hope that he was paid well for those.
That's such a satisfying thing to know, that he's a lovely guy.
Oh, he's fantastic.
He's great.
he was like, of all the people I've met, he was my biggest kind of star sighting. And I felt
That's awesome.
most tongue-tied meeting him because my brother and I had watched Second City Television growing up. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that.
It's probably before our time.
He was a comedy hero, and my brother and I used to sneak out late to the TV late at night when we were kids to watch him.
Nice. So were you guys involved with getting him into American Pie then?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. It was a very small movie, and we didn't have much of a notion of like star casting or stunt casting. But I think the whole movie started to work once we cast Eugene. And to be honest, the kind of dynamic between him and his son, between him and Jason Biggs, was really due to him. Before he came along, it was much more of a kind of hale and hearty middle American kind of bro dad, and Eugene took it to become like this really lovely version of a deeply embarrassing but loving father.
Yeah.
That's awesome, man. That's such a cool little tidbit to know because I can totally see that like Eugene Levy bringing his own to the character. That's really, really cool.
Yeah, and I definitely think that a lot of Eugene Levy, it's because of Eugene Levy that those films had such a staying power, and the fact that they're able to keep churning out sequels is because he kept agreeing to do them. I mean,
absolutely. He's the secret weapon of the whole thing.
Yeah, that and male porn voice from the first one.
That is my greatest role. Yes, male porn voice. Those are things that you do that you don't realize later are going to be on IMDb.
That's hilarious, man.
So you started this franchise, and then how does it feel to see? Because I mean, you haven't seen all of the direct-to-DVD sequels. How does it feel to see something that you kind of birthed be sort of dragged through the mud, so to speak?
Well, again, I can't comment on the later episodes in the saga. But and also I want to give proper credit to Adam Hers, who's really the guy who gave birth to it.
Right.
I think my brother and I were like the obstetricians or the gynecologists to that birth. I think I still remain extremely fond of American Pie and attached to it. And it is amazing how much affection there is out there when I meet people of a certain age. And I instantly try to calculate whether they were of age to get into an R movie when they say they saw it. And occasionally I'll apologize to people and to their parents, now elderly parents. But I feel I feel incredibly lucky, as I do about so many things that happened early on in my career, that I was able to do it. The funny thing was it wasn't me at all, right? I didn't go to American high school. I went to sixth form in London. So I never had a prom or anything like that. So I obviously the things that are universal about the movie, but it wasn't a world that I really knew, and I wasn't even a fan of teen sex comedies. Like I hadn't seen that many, but I still now feel deeply, deeply attached to it.
Well, totally, because we talked about this when we discussed it on our show, that like American Pie is what you're describing when you're describing the genre of teen sex comedy.
That's so
like
funny.
You say like that you didn't have the same experiences, but everybody's wanted to lose their virginity in high school, right? And that's integral to what that movie is and what that genre is. So I totally see why it means so much to people.
It's strange how also that that movie, which is so smutty, really now seems kind of innocent. In a strange way.
Yeah,
because it's like a weird mix between being tame compared to what we have now, and also being like, I can't believe they got away with that at the time.
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, part of that was because we were the little movie that could, right? There was when we were making American Pie, we were making it. It was a $10 million budget, which is a lot of money, of course, but it's very little for a studio. And they were making what they thought were going to be their big movies, which was Meet Joe Black. And Babe, Pig in the City. And for various reasons, both of those movies didn't do well. But while we were making it, that those movies were the concern of the studio. They didn't really pay much attention to us. So every day we were getting away with things or doing things without being sort of noted to death by the studio. So to this day, I think the best situation you can be in if you're making a Hollywood movie is to have a big movie that is not yours in some kind of ropey shape at the same time, right? You want all the attention to be elsewhere if possible.
Yeah, so there's American Pie and The Lion King, the two greatest movies of all time, were both made because the studio was focusing on other projects at the time.
Oh, what was the Lion King's?
Disney were focused on Pocahontas while The Lion King was being made, so that's why The Lion King's so good, basically, because it didn't have the same restrictions and stuff on it.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's good. That's interesting.
That's crazy. Talking about films that are like close to people's hearts, and obviously AJ and I grew up in a kind of time where American Pie was the go-to like sleepover film if you're having like your mates over, and one of them has a cool mum, and we'll let you like get that out. But a film that's always that I've always enjoyed that I was excited to find out that you were involved in is Down to Earth, the Chris Rock film. So,
thanks.
Yeah, like I don't really have a specific question. I just like, do you have any fun experiences?
Thank you for Down to Earth.
Yeah, thank you. And did you have any like, what was it like making that film?
We had a great time making it. It was making a comedy after American Pie, of course, but it was also because it was largely African American cast. Was it just a different setup for us? So it was really cool. I mean, we had a great time working with Chris, of course, and he's a fascinating guy. He's incredibly sort of smart and interesting. So just to get to hang out with him was a pleasure. But also the guys he was working with, including like Ali Leroy and Nelson George and Louis C.K., although he's fallen into just repute now. They were really great to hang out with. And we shot at the Apollo, which doesn't mean much to a lot of people, but in New York, it's a sort of legendary institution. And cool. It was super, super cool to work on. And of course, you got to work with Eugene again. And
I was going to say.
Getting the band back together sort of feeling. But it's definitely the movie that people forget we did. And I think we kind of occasionally forget it too. Because I think in part because About a Boy sort of was so well regarded by people. As a matter of fact, to this day, I'll meet somebody and they ask like, "Oh, what did you do? What have you worked on?" And I say, "Blah blah 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 blah." About a Boy. Oh, I love that movie. Oh God, that was a great movie. And what I always take from that is the implication: why don't you make anything as good as that anymore? So it's like it's now 18 years ago, and I seem not to be able to move past that one.
Yeah, well, see, for me, it's like, why can't you make something as good as Down to Earth?
So even longer since I've made something worthwhile.
Hey, I absolutely adore About a Boy, and we'll get to talking about that in just a second. Just in the interest of going in the order of our questions, so we don't forget about them. So what I think is cool is that as I said, your name popped up a lot in the history and the legacy of our podcast, because another franchise that we did a comprehensive deep dive into was, of course, the Twilight films, and you, sir, are the director of Twilight, the Twilight Saga, New Moon. So the second film,
it's a saga, much like the Nordic sagas of old.
Exactly. And what I think is interesting about that is that Twilight's the American Pie of the next generation, essentially. So the question I want to ask you, Chris, is how does it feel to be partly responsible for the sexual awakening of an entire generation of teenage boys with American Pie, and then subsequently be partly responsible for the sexual awakening of an entire generation of teenage girls with Twilight and New Moon? Because New Moon's the one where Jacob takes his shirt off and gives it to Bella
Yes.
as she's fallen off the motorbike, and you see his
Yeah.
his gorgeous rippling abs. So I know plenty of girls in my high school who saw that movie a lot of times just for that moment there.
He does have amazing abs, doesn't he? I'm trying to remember. I think that was in the books, right? So I can't claim to have come up with a genius idea of having him take off his shirt. But I did frame those shots very carefully.
There you go. Yeah.
Well, I can't. I certainly don't think about it as instrumental to the sexual awakening of teenage girls. Because that would be too strange. I suppose, I guess I think like I was very lucky to be associated with these franchises, not just from the point of view of feeding my children, but just to have experienced that kind of enthusiasm. I mean, it's weird when you're making a movie because you're with a bunch of people, the crew, and you grow to love them and have a great time with them, hopefully. But then when the movie comes out, it sort of plays without you. It's not like being in a play where you get to see the audience's reactions all the time. And for the most part, it's as though nothing is actually happening in front of you. But if you're fortunate enough to work on a franchise with this kind of enthusiasm, you can really experience a human connection. I mean, when you're watching a comedy you've made, you get the kind of instant gratification of people laughing. Certainly people laughed at New Moon, but I don't think intentionally. To have kind of to have experienced the kind of insane enthusiasm that people brought to Twilight was so amazing. Like I remember going on a press tour for New Moon, and we went to the Olympic Stadium in Munich, which was filled with 20,000 screaming teenagers in order to answer 2 or 3 questions, perhaps 10 minutes worth of time from the audience. And it was really like just for a moment getting a slice of kind of Beatlemania. And that's very, very exciting. So as you know, as inclined as I am sometimes to sort of be a bit skeptical or snarky about Twilight, actually, I'm really touched by what it meant to people, and
totally.
And those kids are cool, you know. That was part of the reason that I did it, was I really liked the actors, and abs and all. I still remain kind of attached to them from that experience.
Yeah, and they've had pretty great careers. I mean, Taylor Lautner's kind of biggest thing has been the 0% on Rotten Tomatoes ridiculous 6, but Robert Pattinson and Chris Stewart are doing pretty well for themselves.
They have. I mean, it was a bit of a golden cage, I think. I mean, of course, anyone should be so lucky as to be cast in this kind of incredibly popular franchise. But I think that when they started, they didn't quite know what they were getting themselves into and the degree to which their lives would be under a microscope. So I think that it's cool that they found various ways to do interesting stuff.
Yeah, because you see interviews with them from like post or like during the later years of Twilight when they're both very over it and don't really want to be associated with it. Was there any of that kind of like animosity on set towards the material, or that they were perfectly professional?
They're really professional. I mean, I think I'm not even sure if animosity would be the word for it. I think there's this weird sense of being both grateful and also stuck. Because I think they probably felt that they hadn't realized, or they hadn't really thought through 4 movies in which they would be carrying these franchises, and also I think it wasn't even the movies necessarily so much as the fans, obviously the kind of paradoxical situation of being really psyched that people like it and like them, but at the same time not having enough of them to go around for millions and millions of people. And then, it's very, I think I've never had this problem, which is good, of sort of having to maintain myself in public when people are clamoring for attention and, and looking out for any time that you are just in a shit mood or hungover or, having a bad day and say or do something that is not perfectly sort of PR ready.
Yeah. This is going to sound sarcastic, but I do want to just shine a light on what is actually one of my favorite film characters and film performances of all time is Billy Burke as Charlie Swan.
Yeah.
And so, did you realize at the time when you're crafting one of the all-time great performances?
It's all down to Billy. Charlie Swan, great dad, terrible cop. He never never gets to the bottom of these murders from the first book, does he? And then,
no, he doesn't.
Then everyone just moves on.
The story.
Yeah. It's interesting that he keeps his job under the circumstances. I think. No, I think Billy is great. He's a very lovely guy, bemused much as Charlie Swan himself is by what's going on around him. But no, I didn't have deep note sessions with.
Wait,
with
so
Billy.
Are you saying that Billy Burke in real life is as amazing as Charlie Swan?
Well, nobody's as amazing as Charlie Swan.
Thank you. Yeah.
You heard it here first, folks. A Cult Popture exclusive.
Yeah, I've been said when we covered Twilight, I gave this massive diatribe about how he's actually one of the greatest film characters of all time.
Well, it's interesting. Not enough attention is paid to sort of roles that are in genre pieces or that are the that are not the sort of leads in these movies, and when you see professional actors and very good actors kind of dutifully doing these parts, occasionally there are these sort of gems.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the Chris Weitz touch, isn't it? Putting emphasis on those secondary characters.
And you created the greatest secondary character of all time in Charlie Swan. So there you go.
No, I can't take any credit for that.
But I mean, some of his best work is in New Moon when she's up late crying in bed and he wants to help, but he doesn't know how. And it's such a tragic performance.
Oh, thanks, man. Well, I mean, I'll tell him next time I see him.
Yeah, no.
Oh my God! Can you actually tell him?
I will.
Can you tell him there's a New Zealand podcast that rates his performance up there with Marlon Brando and Godfather? And
honestly,
I will tell him. I'll try to render it in a way that doesn't sound sarcastic.
Yeah,
so.
And if he's always got. Yeah, he's always got, there's always a spot here for him if he wants to join us as well.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just 3 hours of questions about Twilight.
We once interviewed the guy who directed The Sandlot. And we asked him about Beethoven's Third and Fourth for the whole interview because he also directed those films. So one of the things we pride ourselves here on Cult Popture is focusing on the niche projects that the directors don't necessarily have anything to say about. But you get some exclusive interviews out of it.
Right, so. Really putting people back on their abilities to vamp on something that they would rather not remember.
Yeah, be like, you've tried to hide this for your entire career, but...
I don't feel that way about New Moon, actually. I feel deeply beholden to it.
That's awesome.
Yeah. One of your... so, to dig up things from your past, one of your earliest credits, and you shouldn't be ashamed of it, as ANTZ. You do the screenplay for that. So that was very early on in your career. But there's... I'm sure you're aware of this, the phenomenon called twin films, where there's two films come out with a similar setting or characters or whatever, and Ants in a Bug's Life, Pixar's A Bug's Life, is one of the classic examples of that. So was there a time during Antz's production that you remember learning of A Bug's Life, and how did that affect it at all?
Yeah, it was kind of a rumor that went the rounds. More than a rumor, actually. I think people were aware that there's going to be a film called A Bug's Life. And it seemed like a strange phenomenon what I do remember with regards to that was that we had a fake schedule. But nobody told me it was fake until we were actually sort of almost ready. So in theory, we were supposed to come out after Bug's Life, but we sort of stole a march on them and came out first, which is kind of a relief because Bug's Life kind of destroyed us at the box office eventually. Here to sort of stack them up one against the other. And of course, I wasn't overly concerned because I was just very, very happy to have that job. It's kind of the thing that really made the difference for me and my brother. It was the credit that got us the chance to direct American Pie because people really dug that screenplay. And again, working with now maligned people, it was kind of a feather in our cap to have worked with Woody Allen. You see, our timing is fantastic so far. So that was hugely important to us. I think I would have been a lot more nervous if I had realized that there was the possibility that we would have been blown out of the water by Bug's Life if we would come out at the same time.
But the thing is, you say that it destroyed you in the box office and stuff, but Bug's Life also stars Kevin Spacey, who's probably worse than Woody Allen in a lot of ways.
There you go. Oh my God!
Also beat you for that punch.
It's kind of it's edgy possible abuser against edgy possible abuser. Well, it's almost certain abuser.
Yeah, and it was also A Bug's Life was directed by John Lasseter. Who's
oh my God, yeah.
Well, I think rather than seeing it as a series of bizarre coincidences, it may just be that men in Hollywood have been behaving incredibly badly for decades, and that it's all coming out. To be serious for a moment, I actually think it's really good that these things are are coming to light because hopefully it will. I think it's like really like turning around a battleship to change male behavior, but at least to kind of put a damper on various shitty ways in which people have been behaving is a good thing.
Yeah, and you look at all the new kind of protocols that have been put in place to make people feel safer on set and stuff like that. It's generally like. Yeah, it's a good thing.
It is a good thing.
We wholeheartedly agree. Hey, Chris, this is a bit of a starstruck moment for me because you co-directed About a Boy, and About a Boy is one of my favorite movies of all time.
Oh, thank you.
I absolutely love About a Boy, and in that sense, it's an honor to meet you.
Thanks,
and talk to you about it because that movie is so instrumental in my own personal. Like, About a Boy is the type of movie I'd want to make, is what I tell people.
Yeah,
cool.
About a Boy was AJ's sexual awakening.
After American Pie and Twilight. So one of the things that I really love About a Boy, and I made a video on this a couple years ago, and I'm actually aiming to make another one and hopefully use a soundbite from this podcast. Have you ever read a book called Invisible Ink by Brian McDonald? It's a screenwriting guide.
I have not.
So one of the things that I absolutely love that he talks about in that is he addresses the idea of masculine and feminine storytelling. So if you don't want to gender it, it's external and internal storytelling. Mm-hmm. And for listeners who haven't seen About a Boy, the ending of that film is the perfect example of masculine and feminine storytelling coming together. So just to reiterate for the listeners, it ends with like Will, who's played by Hugh Grant, and he's like a cool dude, sacrificing his reputation to play guitar on stage with this embarrassing little kid to like protect him. Basically, right? So you've got a guy who realizes that he can be important to other people, and it's the culmination of his emotional arc, and he does it in a way that is external. So he's playing guitar on stage, and it's very fun and silly to watch. I'm sorry for gushing. I get so cathartic over that.
I love it.
Yeah, that scene isn't in the novel. I don't think that book is based, that the movie's based off. So. Is there any insight you can give us into that, how that scene came about in the writing stage?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you. That's really a shot in the arm. So the book was set around the time of Kurt Cobain's death. So it was already if we had made that, first of all, we wouldn't have gotten the rights to any of the music, but second of all, it would have been sort of a period film set 5 years earlier. So Paul and I really didn't want to do that. We wanted to contemporize it, and it also had I believe certainly the script. Before we came to it, had a big sort of set piece in Piccadilly Circus, and as I recall, the sort of thing that was supposed to be the saving grace for Will's character was a reminder of all of the little things that happen that make his life worthwhile. But we weren't 100% convinced by that. We wanted something that was kind of like a Hollywood third act, where the good guy goes to the bad guy headquarters and kills everyone and blows things up. But how to do that, given that we had set up this sort of very internal, idiosyncratic, two-person, really, story. And so, in a way, we saw it as kind of a romantic comedy.
Totally.
And although it sounds grotesque and inappropriate between Hugh Grant's character and the boy, Nick Holt's character. But so really what we then sort of found ourselves looking at was something more like the equivalent of the guy running after the train, or, trying to stop the girl and propose to her before she goes away, or stop the wedding, whatever it may be. And so we were circling around then what it was that would kind of bring catharsis to Hugh Grant's character. And he was a character who was always alone and always cool, and so we wanted to subject him to the torment of being uncool in front of a bunch of people, and equally it seemed appropriate for the character of Marcus, who was bullied, to be in peril in that kind of way, right? So Hugh Grant is kind of also saving the maiden, as it were, and it all sort of combined into the idea of something which was going to be, the ultimate peril for both of them. But of course, it was social peril, and really, in a way, it means nothing, to humiliate yourself in front of a crowd. It doesn't amount to much, but for these characters, it's a really big deal. So that's how we ended up at this this kind of third act moment. Somehow it all worked, and I think that there was some doubt as to whether it would, frankly. So it was. It was like the biggest sequence we'd ever shot. Now I have the shot map, which is kind of a diagram of where all the cameras would go for each setup. And it's something like 90 shots if you look at the whole sequence around that. So this is as close as we've ever gotten to shooting like a big stunt scene or something. And it all worked. We weren't necessarily expecting it to, but it was kind of one of those times, which I have to remind myself of now, where you come up with an idea and you go like, it's going to work, it's going to be great, and you kind of brass it out, and it actually kind of pays off.
Yeah, man. Like, I'm sorry, it's actually perfect. It's a perfect moment of film. It's a perfect ending. It's a perfect culmination of character arc.
That's very kind. And but if that's so, then it's a bit sad, because then, like, once you've had a perfect moment, where do you go?
But we were talking before about because Where was about a boy in your career. Like, at least it wasn't like your first project had something like that in it, because that's how I think of things. I'm like, if I'm doing a series of something, I'm like, the first one can't be the best one. It has to be at least the second one's the best one.
Yeah, no, that's cool. It was the third movie, but it's funny. I was reading this article, which was one of these kind of articles you read on the web because it speaks to you in some way, and it was like the article was pointing out. People have these hot streaks, and hot streaks usually last 3 or 4 years creatively. And the article was designed to encourage people who hadn't had their hot streak yet. But I realized that what that implied was that my hot streak was gone. I'm just kind of paddling along in my lukewarm streak at the moment.
Well, I mean, you can't sell yourself short. I mean, just a few years ago, you worked on this gigantic property of Star Wars.
We're talking all about how like About a Boy was the most like intense thing you worked on, and you wrote a fucking Star Wars movie, and like people will be clicking on this podcast, wanting to listen to an interview with the one of the guys who wrote Rogue One.
I know,
and we've talked for 40
Star
minutes
Wars?
about American Pie and About a Boy.
Yeah, like. So how did you get the job of writing the first Star Wars story?
Kind of begging. I remember when it was sort of bandied about that they were going to make more Star Wars movies. I would say to all and sundry, agent, lawyers, people at Disney, listen, I'm all about Star Wars. Like this would be my dream job, which was true because I watched Star Wars in the theater when I was 7 years old, and I watched it 19 times in original release.
Cool.
I was bananas about it. It sort of defined my life. And so if you could have asked me one thing I would want to work on in my career, it would be Star Wars. And the opportunity came. And when it happens to you, you sort of get this call, and they say they want to talk to you about Star Wars. They're not going to tell you what it is until you get in the room. And of course, your non-disclosure up the wazoo. You have to sign forms and, give away your firstborn. And so I didn't know until I was in the room which one it was going to be. So, and this is a hot take, but I really don't like Boba Fett, and I was worried it was going to be Boba Fett because I was going to be like, this is my life, right? I was like feeling preemptively bitter, like I get to work on Star Wars, but it's fucking Boba Fett. This guy gets killed by accident. That's how badass he is. And when I found out it was the opening crawl, I was so happy because it was being able to work on the franchise I loved the most and the part of it that I loved the most. So
that's
it was
awesome, dude.
So sweet.
Yeah, so like when was this that these discussions were taking place?
Let me see. I guess it was 2015, 2016. When did Rogue One come out?
2016. Yeah.
Okay, so it would have been 2015 because it was a good year and a half before things got going. And I should say that I am one of a series of writers who worked on that. So
of course.
I was the second guy in after Gary Whitta, who's fantastic, and others followed. So it's you don't really own this stuff, and I think that a lot of the things that make it different writing Star Wars, different to write Star Wars from writing other stuff is that it's kind of like a public trust if you look at it in terms of the number of people who care about it.
Yeah, because there must have been like immense pressure that not only is it the biggest property of all time, but it's also like it was the first experiment of if this would work doing these spin-offs.
Yeah, it was. There was a lot of pressure. I mean, I think really the most pressure was on Gareth Edwards. And I think he bore up incredibly well under it. But certainly, you do feel a lot of pressure. But then again, I also kind of felt that I was supremely qualified because I had thought about Episode 4 as much as any person I can imagine.
Yeah.
So because you were able because you have written by credit, but then you submit Gary Whitta and someone else's name escapes me.
Tony Gilroy.
Yeah, they have like the story by credit. So for those that sort of aren't aware, how does those different credits kind of work, and where do you come in, and what kind of influence do you have on the script?
Well, I think Gary gets story credit, and Tony Gilroy and I share written by credit or screenplay credit.
Yeah, on the Wikipedia page. It's screenplay by you and Tony, and John Knoll and Gary Whitta is credited with.
Oh
story.
Yes, of course, John Knoll as well. Yeah, because John Knoll was the guy who first came up with the notion of doing it. Who's the head of ILM.
Nice.
Well, it's really arcane. Eventually the credits are determined by if there's any dispute over it, and there usually is. In something this big, because all kinds of people are contributing to it.
Yeah,
it is. A bunch of writers from the Writers Guild look over every single draft in theory, and try to work out kind of where the bodies are buried. So the best answer to how that all happens would be to look at the Writers Guild credits manual, which is pretty dull reading unless you're trying to get credit in an arbitration. It's definitely not as clear cut as story by and screenplay by implies, because that sounds like Gary came in and just said, "Well, the story should be this," and then left. There are bits of screenplay by him in the movie, many of them. There are bits of story that I did. There are many bits of story and screenplay by other writers as well. And I'm just super lucky that the kind of the die fell the way it did.
Yeah, because I was about to ask, are there any sort of story moments that you can point to as being like, this was my bit?
Yeah, oh, definitely. I mean, the most obvious one is everybody dying, which the version prior to that didn't have everyone die. As a matter of fact, it ended with a wedding, and I think it was on the presumption that Disney wouldn't allow characters to die with such abandon, and I felt that it was necessary, first of all, because nobody ever mentions them again or sees them again later in the series, as it were, chronologically, but also because we'd done this whole sort of theme about sacrifice, that it was appropriate that all of our main characters died. The bringing it to the very, very moment before episode 4 starts. That was, I think, my notion from the get-go. And there are bits here and there. There are also bits that I'm very sad were not in it. For instance, he was reduced to kind of a weird little monster of the week character, but there was this creature, Boar Gullet, who was Saw Gerrera's kind of version of a lie detector machine. This kind of octopoid creature that reads brains, but he was a much bigger speaking role originally, and I was super into it as a kind of, to have been able to create one of the great Star Wars monsters was something I was really into doing. But he got cut. Poor Gullet, his career cut short.
So speaking of things that got cut. And also, you mentioned non-disclosure agreements before, and when we sent you this question, I was like, this will be the one he says he can't answer. But you didn't say not to take it off, so here it is. Rogue One, if you're a film buff, and all three of us are, but so if you're a film buff, you know that Rogue One became notorious for having widely publicized reshoots. People talk about how the vision of the original cut was changed. Things like that, you watch the first trailer for the film, there's a handful of sequences that nothing even close to that ended up being in the film. Yeah. As one of the writers, can you offer insight into anything else that was going to be different, and how do you feel about the final cut?
I'll answer it in reverse. First of all, I feel great about the final cut.
Okay, cool.
I really liked the movie, and that was a huge relief because once you stop writing on one of these, the security wall goes up, and I had no idea what it was really going to look like until I sat down at the premiere. So weirdly, it was like watching a movie that I had written on and watching a new movie at the same time, because I knew there was going to be all this kind of new footage. And it is one of the great joys of screenwriters to be able to bitch and moan about what's been done to their work. But I didn't have that satisfaction because I really, really liked it.
That's really cool.
I remember sitting next to Gary Whitta, first writer on it, and we were just kind of high-fiving at various moments when cool things happened, especially when there were surprises. So I have no complaints about that. I think the other part of the question was like, what can I give any insight into what was changed? A lot of the stuff that's on the net about the net, Do only 80-year-old people say that?
No, it's fine. We say the
internet,
net. We say the
the
net.
net, the information superhighway. A lot of stuff that's on the web is actually correct in terms of things that were changed, things that were added. Let me see. If you imagine the beginning of the second act and the end of the second act kind of swapping places, that would not be an inaccurate way to portray how structurally it was changed. The Darth Vader kicking ass, I cannot take credit for. That was a later invention. And so that was quite different. I think the battle stayed much the same. Sometimes when I see things that were changed, it seems as though they were changed in ways I can't quite put my finger on in terms of why. Yeah. So a lot of the deaths were put into different locations than they originally were in the script, originally were shot. I'm not sure exactly why. For instance, K2 died in a different place in the previous version. Let me see. Well, it all kind of turns into a bit of a mush because I remember at some point cutting a planet, but that was still during my period. It was like, guys, we've got to cut 20 million, so one of these planets has got to go. And you go, oh shit, that's going to be hard. Let me see. I'll tell you something that was quite different, right? And I don't think I'm talking out of school to say this. In the last version that I worked on, it wasn't clear at the beginning of the movie that the Death Star was going to be the Death Star. There's just this sense that the rebellion had that something bad was going down, and we needed to find out about it. So there was this kind of developing sense of dread throughout the film. And in the version on screens, you basically have a guy say, there's a planet killer, they're making a thing that's going to blow up planets, it's called the Death Star or something like that, very early on. And I can understand that definitely somebody at some point said, why are we making like such a big mystery of something that the audience already knows anyway? And that is certainly an argument. But I was pushing originally for something that had more of a sense of dramatic irony. But that's kind of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. And like I said, I think the movie really works.
Yeah, man. I mean, you said before that that you can't take credit for the Darth Vader thing, but you did say that your idea was that everyone dies. And in my opinion, everyone dying is what makes the Darth Vader scene work. Because you after the prequels, which I won't make you tell us your opinion on the prequels, but I didn't like them. I didn't like Darth Vader that much after the prequels, and when I heard they were making Rogue One, you were making Rogue One. I remember someone on Reddit or something, someone suggested or said like, "I hope all the characters die," and I heard that and I was like, "Fuck yes." Like, all the characters should die. So just like with About a Boy, dude, you landed on the perfect ending for
the sexual awakening of a generation. Well, that's cool. Yeah, I think it isn't. It's clearly a narrative possibility once you realize that you're either going to tell the story of these characters who somehow disappear at the end of it with no accounting, or kill them off, which was
definitely made the right choice.
It's brutal. It's so good. It's so good.
You.
Yeah, and so you probably can't say everything if you do, but the do you know the Diego Luna helmed like he's starring in a Rogue One based kind of TV show? Do you know? Are you involved in that at all? Do you know anything about it?
I am not, and so I know absolutely zero about it. Which saves me from having to say I can't talk about it, which would probably be the other possibility if I did know anything about it.
Yeah. So like either way, you don't really have an answer.
I don't, except that more Diego Luna is a good thing. So that's cool.
Yeah. It'd be cool to see more of those characters. But So I guess we'll sort of start to wrap up with the final like feel good kind of questions.
Good.
But so out of all of your projects, writing, directing, what have you, what would you say is your favorite?
Oh, let me see. Well, it might be American Pie just because we were so new to it, and it was such a case of kind of having fun, improvising every day. And then seeing something grow incredibly successful in a very unexpected way. So that was the most charmed experience that my brother and I have had. But also, I feel very close to this movie I made called A Better Life, which is about a Mexican immigrant in Los Angeles, and has very few yucks. But I think, Demian Bashir, who was the lead in that, was nominated for an Academy Award, and that remains one of my proudest moments. So I'll give you those two.
Nice, yeah. And because you were nominated for an Academy Award for About a Boy, that's correct? Nice.
Yeah, that was very cool.
Yeah.
You get to do all kinds of fun stuff when you get nominated, including going to this cool luncheon where it's like the high school, and then you take sort of a high school picture with all the other people, and some of the guys are like sound technicians, and others are Brad Pitt or whatever. So it's kind of a cool get together, and I think they can't take it away from you. Which is good.
Yeah, that's not like hosting the Oscars. They can't just take it away from you.
Yeah.
But yeah, we mentioned Brad Pitt, your Mr. and Mrs. Smith co-star.
Wow, you're very good.
Yeah.
You're very versed.
Did the research.
Yeah. He was cast opposite me in Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
in the Chris Weitz vehicle that was Mr. and Mrs. Smith.
That was really quite bizarre, that experience. I was only cast in that because my girlfriend at the time was cast in it, and then she dropped out, and nobody had the heart to tell me that I should leave as well. So I just hung in there.
It's just like you just wouldn't leave set, and they're like, "Oh, I guess we'll just film him."
Nobody wants to tell him. Let's just do it.
Oh, he made American Pie. We'll throw him a bone.
That's awesome.
And so, would you have what advice would you have for someone looking to get started in either writing or directing?
Yeah, I mean, the best advice is just to do it and not to try to be too strategic about it, I think. And in terms of actually making movies, I think that the equipment, is more accessible than ever. The ability to cut your own films. So that is that's kind of amazing in terms of just being able to make a film and get it out there on the internet for people to see if you want. Like a guy that I cast in my last movie in Operation Finale, this guy Greg Hill, was the star in a movie that was only released on YouTube by this guy Brad Elmore, who made a movie in Bend, Oregon, off his own bat. Because he loves films, and I was able to help get one of Brad's movies to Blumhouse to look at, and they helped finance it. And so there are cases where just going ahead and doing it without asking anybody's permission is the thing to do. Actually, the movie that won the Deauville Film Festival. By a guy called Jim Cummings, was basically handmade by him and his collaborators. The one bit of technical advice I'll give on that regard, though, is that while audiences can forgive all kinds of defects in the visuals of a movie, the sound quality is something that you can instantly tell is a sign of something lacking. So that if you were to 100%. Worry about anything, I would worry about miking your actors properly.
Yeah, because did you have any formal training in film?
No. As a matter of fact, we kind of learned on the set on American Pie, and we were taught by our DP Richie Crudo and JB Rogers, our first AD. They were our film teachers, and we were I like to think pretty humble about what we knew and didn't know, and as a result, they and that crew kind of brought us up as filmmakers.
Yeah, because I do always wonder, like, how a director goes from doing something like American Pie or like About a Boy to then tackling these things like The Golden Compass or New Moon, which are like covered in CGI.
Yeah.
And it's like, how do you learn to do like to shoot for CGI and stuff like that?
I think it takes a combination of doing all the research you can do and trying to be as open as possible with the professionals who've been doing it over and over again in terms of learning as quickly as possible. One of the great things about making a studio film is the extraordinary crews and their sort of breadth of knowledge. So these are guys and gals who've been doing this for decades and who are incredibly accomplished. And so there's an amazing knowledge base in every crew. But some of that knowledge is also out there on the interwebs right now.
Yeah.
Cool. So before we ask our final question, just what projects have you got on the horizon? Do you want to plug anything? Do you want to tell us to go see something that you're making or keep a lookout for something? What's going on?
Let me see. Well, the last movie I made, Operation Finale, is on Netflix now. Do you guys have Netflix in New Zealand?
Yep.
Yes. We call it Netflix.
Good. Netflix. And I am working on Pinocchio for Disney.
Cool.
Right now, I'm in London working on that, and Paul King, who directed Paddington and Paddington 2, is directing.
Oh, awesome!
So that's what I'm up to, really.
So your second live action Disney reimagining after Cinderella.
It is. That was a really good experience for me, and working with Ken Branagh was fantastic. So here we go.
Yeah, because it's pretty crazy when you think about that. Like Disney, like you were in charge in some way, or contributed in some way to two of Disney's massive cash cows that they're now pouring a lot of money into. Their like Star Wars and the live action remakes. Because Cinderella was one of the first, or that of the new movement of them anyway.
It was. Something I like about Disney, which is perhaps something people don't like about it, is that they have a real sense of themselves as a company and of their kind of responsibility to children's minds. So they really do take seriously like whether Cinderella is going to feel like a regressive fairy tale or something more positive and more contemporary. So that kind of matters to me.
Awesome.
Cool. So longtime fans of our podcast who listened to our American Pie episode, Richard and I had a small argument or a debate.
No, it was pretty heated. It almost ended our friendship. We had an argument like almost a year earlier that almost ended up in fisticuffs.
Yeah.
Jeez.
So it's about American Pie. And there's something in American Pie that I interpreted the scene as this way. Richard thought I was an idiot for interpreting that way. And
I know what you're going to talk about. Yeah. Okay. Gosh, I'm going to get right in the middle of this. Okay.
After we released the episode where we talked about it, we had people reaching out to us saying that they understood what I meant. And they were like, yeah, no, I totally thought that too. So I'll paint the picture for those who don't know what we're talking about. In American Pie, when the character of Kevin is performing a sexual act known as the tongue tornado on his girlfriend Vicky, her dad approaches her bedroom to tell her that it's time to come down for dinner. As he's approaching the door, he hears Vicky yell, "I'm coming," after which he shrugs his shoulders and leaves. Okay, is this because... Is this because he thinks Vicky is telling him that she's coming down for dinner, or does he realize that his daughter is in the middle of an orgasm and decide not to interrupt her?
First, can I know who holds which opinion?
I interpreted it as being he realizes she's having an orgasm and is a cool dad, and he's like, I'm not going to interrupt my daughter in the throes of passion.
Yeah.
I'll leave them be.
See, whereas I didn't want to insult the filmmakers, and I was like, no, it's not a joke if it's your interpretation.
He's a cool dad.
Right. Well, I think
that's a joke.
clearly New Zealand is a more liberated society than America in the late 90s, because I have to say that the joke is that he thinks she's saying she's coming down.
Breaking my heart.
Vindication.
All the stuff I said about a boy has just gone out the window now.
Oh no! Yeah, well, I'm really sorry.
I think I knew that deep down. It was more just being pushed out by the people who reached out to us. I was like, oh my god, maybe this is actually what it means.
Yeah, because originally he was like, no, I saw an IMDb forum post of someone that agreed with me, and it's like, well, and then when we went to check, the IMDb had conveniently gotten rid of the forum feature.
No, I found it. I feel like I found the other question on IMDb was, is Stifler's nickname for Finch, is it Shit Brick or Shit Break?
Shit Break.
Yeah.
Okay.
Shit Break.
That one's a bit more reasonable, but
he takes a break to shit. But in both of these cases, if the filmmaker has not it's really the fault of the filmmaker, I think, not to have gotten those points across.
Yeah. Well, I think in this case, especially with the Vicky scene, it's the fault of the viewer. It was incredibly clear what you meant, and I understood it. Being a fellow film buff, a fellow director, I knew what you were talking about.
Right.
There you go. Somehow Richard comes out at the end of that conversation looking like the butthole instead of me. Cool. Well, hey, Chris, this has been one of the best episodes of our show. I think I've so enjoyed talking to you. I've so enjoyed getting to know you and your fascinating career. Like, you have had a fascinating career, at least for two guys who have never made a film. Really, this you are like strolling through the weirdest corners in like making films, So I love that about you, and I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much.
Thank you, guys. Really appreciate it. And hello to your listeners. And great to meet you guys.
Yeah, great to meet you, man. And if you see Billy Burke, just tell him we said hi.
I will tell him that someone loves him somewhere.
Man. What a good interview. I found that captivating to be a part of and captivating to listen to. And thank you so much, Chris, for coming on the show and just sharing your wisdom with us. I feel like I've learned so much.
I feel like I could direct a Twilight now.
So yeah, if you want to check out any of Chris's upcoming stuff, stuff that's out now, he's got a film on Netflix called Operation Finale, and he's also keep an eye out for the Pinocchio movie that's coming out as well. Anyway, that's us for the show. I hope you enjoyed.
And that's us for the year.
That's us for the year. Oh my gosh, true. So if you liked this and you liked us, then why don't you check us out on YouTube and Facebook and Instagram and Gmail, cultpoptionmedia@gmail.com. Check us out on Gmail. We're also on SoundCloud, iTunes, all the places you get your podcasts. And
we'll see you in 2019 with some top content.
It's going to get even better.
It's our year. I can feel it.
I can feel it. This is it. All right. Thank you very much, everybody. And good night.
Once again, thank you to Chris.
Yes.
We salute you, sir.